IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Monday, doing something a little bit different this week. Since I'm not going to be able to go live tomorrow or Wednesday, I wanted to get a show in with you guys on today, so we can have some fun talking about this big game this weekend. Because there was no way, no matter what's going on, there was no way I was going to be able to spend some time with you guys talking about Notre Dame USC. And so I'm here today. I'm excited about what we got going on, folks. Do me a favor before we get started too much. Hit that like button for me. If you're not a subscriber, go ahead and make sure you change that reality right now and become a subscriber. But big weekend, guys. Rivalry weekend. It's Notre Dame's rivalry weekend. There's a lot of other big rivalry games going on this weekend. And it's a big opportunity for Notre Dame. I'm going to talk about what's at stake for Notre Dame here as we get ready for this USC game this weekend. You know, kind of what Notre Dame has to prove, what's at stake in this game. I'll preview the game. I'll talk about USC. You know, I've watched a lot of USC this year. What I like, what I don't like. Why I think some fans maybe need to pump the brakes a little bit on just assuming this is going to be a blowout. Can Notre Dame blow USC out? Of course, they've blown out a lot of people. Is it a given? No, it's not. It's going to have to be earned. And we'll talk about that and why I feel that way. And we'll have a little bit of fun with that. Salty, yes. Wednesday will be Buy So Hold. It'll be Vince and Trevor. We'll do that. I won't be here. Tomorrow is my grandmother's viewing, and then Wednesday is her funeral. And I have been granted the honor of doing the eulogy for her. So I've got a big task at hand. So that'll be my priority on Wednesday. I will be here Tuesday night we will go live for the playoff release on Tuesday night. I'll be here for that. Thursday we'll be off because I want everybody to enjoy Thanksgiving. I'm going to try to record a video Wednesday night when I get home from the funeral, and just some thoughts about whatever is on my mind about Notre Dame football. And then Friday, we're not going to do a mailbag on Friday. What we're going to do on Friday is we are going to have our kind of keys to victory, score predictions, and then sort of covering the big national games on Friday. And then what we'll probably do is have a mailbag next Monday after the USC game, depending on how that goes, and just a lot of different things going on with that. So we're going to have a busy week, no doubt about it. Going to be a very busy week. But today, folks, the focus is going to be on Notre Dame USC, and the Irish get one more big opportunity to prove what they're about, and I can't wait to dive into that with y'all. So the first thing is obviously USC is a big part of the discussion for this. But before we kind of get into USC, there's the big picture aspect of what this game means for Notre Dame. And, just there's so much at stake this weekend beyond and this is kind of how it should be, right? I mean, when Notre Dame plays USC, you want something to be on the line for one of them, right? I mean, and unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of that in recent seasons. But, 2 of the last 3 years since Marcus Freeman has arrived, there's been a lot on the table. Actually, in all 3 years, there's been a lot on the table when these two teams have met. USC was obviously fighting for a playoff spot in 2022. If they beat Notre Dame and then won their conference championship game, they'd have been in the playoff. They did beat Notre Dame, did not get it done because they got beat by Utah, got smacked by Utah the next week in the Pac-12 title game. Knocked them out. Last year when USC came to South Bend, they were 6-0, undefeated, ranked number 10 in the country, and Notre Dame was trying to salvage their season, having lost 2 of the 3 previous games, and they were a whole lot closer to being 0-3 than they were 3-0 during that stretch. There's no doubt about that. But, obviously Notre Dame got the job done then. And then this week, there's not a lot on the line for USC. They're 6-5. They're now bowl eligible. There's not a lot for them to prove this weekend as far as their particular resume. What USC is going to be doing is trying to ruin Notre Dame's season and ruin Notre Dame's chances for a playoff bid in a place that has not been super kind to Notre Dame in the last 3 decades, which we'll talk a little bit about when we get into the specifics of the matchup. But, short term, and looking specifically sort of at this season, and you look at what's at stake in this game, there's so much more than just winning your rivalry game. It's at stake. I mean, this is the final test for Notre Dame. I get nervous, and part of my pushback with people that are just, oh, they're going to roll USC, and then Notre Dame is so good, and they're all those things. They are dominant. They're playing great football. They're the hottest team in the country. Notre Dame's PR department put out a tweet this week that's going to sound very familiar to things that I've said to you guys, which is just nobody's dominating the way that Notre Dame is dominating. And when you look at the tweet that Notre Dame put out this morning, let me go ahead and find it here. Because, all right, since October 1st, so that's basically since Notre Dame's bye, Notre Dame leads the nation in points per game at 44.5, and they lead the nation in fewest points allowed at 10.8. The next closest is Tulane at 12.7. Notre Dame has been dominant. And you look at USC and you think 6-5, and they're not very good, and they're this and they're that. And I'm just telling you guys, this is a much better football team than their record shows. And we'll dive into why that is. But this is the final test for Notre Dame to say, hey, look, we always talk about, the issues that we've seen where, just you play down to your level of competition, or how do you lose to this team? How do you lose to that team? Guys, if last weekend in college football was not a warning to all of us that we should not be just assuming Notre Dame's going to go out there and roll this weekend, you're just not paying enough attention. Notre Dame's way more talented than USC. Well, maybe, but Bama was way more talented than Oklahoma. Ole Miss is way more talented than Florida. Alabama's way more talented than Vanderbilt. Ole Miss is way more talented than Kentucky. Tennessee is way more talented than Arkansas. We've seen a lot of this, guys, where the quote-unquote more talented team this season got beat. Notre Dame is more talented than Northern Illinois. Not that I'm still harping on that game, because I'm not. They're a much better team than that. It's just that you've still got to go out there and earn it. And this is not a game that Notre Dame is just going to show up and USC is going to lay down and die. Because if you think that's going to be true, then you haven't paid attention to USC all year. Because as Marcus Freeman pointed out today, he pointed out some things that I've been pointing out for the last week, is that USC has not lost a single game by more than a touchdown. And they have had a fourth quarter lead in every single game that they've played, including all 5 losses. Their 5 losses are by combined 19 points. And so this is an opportunity for Notre Dame to go out there and make a statement, because I feel it's like what I'm listening to some in the media. I mean, there's still a lot of Notre Dame haters out there. I'm so disappointed in some of the things I've heard from, like Joe Klatt, for example, has said some things that, boy, just, man, I used to respect you. And I just, you're kind of embarrassing yourself a little bit with some of your Notre Dame takes. And there's still some of that out there. But there's also a lot of people that are just, Notre Dame's in, they're in, don't worry about it. They're in the playoff, they're going to host. We can talk about somebody else. And I kind of feel like, hey, we kind of remember hearing that from national media way back in the first week of September after Notre Dame beat Texas A&M, and people looked at Notre Dame's schedule and were like, oh, look at the rest of their schedule. They're not going to lose another game. They're in the playoff. Chalk it up. And then, of course, that next week they went out there. And so this Notre Dame football team cannot look at this game the way that Notre Dame fans are looking at this game, which is just easy win, no problem. There's the traveling to the East Coast and then to the West Coast, which has been a really tough situation for Notre Dame over the years. When they've had to travel east and play a game, and then with the next 2 weeks they've had to go out west, it has not been great for Notre Dame. And they've struggled in some of those games, including, going back to, was it 2017, where they had to play Miami and then they had to come home. And then a week later they went, after the Navy game, they went out west and they lost 2 of those 3 games, including Stanford. You look at 2015, when they went out east and played Boston College, really struggled, then went out west and lost to Stanford. We've seen this happen before, and Notre Dame's going to have to make sure that they are locked in a way that right now some of us in the fan base are not, because this is going to be a test. And it's that final opportunity for Notre Dame to make that statement. And here's another thing, you guys know I like looking at obscure statistics. And I was thinking about this, like, man, like Notre Dame's ranked at number 5 now in the polls. And it kind of hit me, it's like, oh man, this is not good, because and Lou Samoji messed with my head this way, because Lou would always talk about this stuff and he would always turn out to be right. But Notre Dame is now ranked number 5 in the AP poll, in the coaches poll. And this has not been a good place for Notre Dame to be. Notre Dame has been since the year 2000. Notre Dame has been ranked number 5, not in the top 5, but ranked number 5 in the AP 7 times, and they're 3-4 in those games, including 3 losses in Marcus Freeman's tenure. They were ranked number 5 going into the Fiesta Bowl. Just I don't really count as on him, but that's still a loss because that was not his team. They were number 5 to start the 2022 season, and lost to Ohio State. They climbed up to number 5 in the AP poll after beating Texas A&M, promptly lost to Northern Illinois. There's also some of the wins have been very ugly. So they also lost to Florida State in 2014 as the number 5 team. That was their first week as number 5. They went on the road, lost to Florida State, who was very good. It's a good team, but they still lost. Their wins are 2020 Florida State during the COVID year. It's a bad Florida State team. 2018 Pitt, they beat Pitt, but if y'all remember, they needed a fourth quarter comeback to beat that not very good Pitt team that lost 7 games that season. And then in 2012, Notre Dame was also their first week ranked 5th, was after they beat Stanford. They climbed up to number 5 in the AP, and that next week they barely beat BYU 17-14. So you look at it and say, you're just one of those weird things that just, I don't know what it is about being ranked number 5, but it's just this kind of resulted in Notre Dame having some bad losses. Hopefully Marcus Freeman can end that streak this season. And that's what this 2024 season has been about. It's been a lot about, okay, doing things that we haven't seen him do at Notre Dame and doing things we haven't seen Notre Dame do, period, in a long time. And those are all parts of growing as a coach and developing as a coach and growing as a program. Is, things that held you back are things you're overcoming now. You think of Clemson and you started to see Coach Dabo Swinney turning things around in 2012 and 2014 and started to, we were talking about this on the board yesterday. And, people like to give Dabo a hard time, and some people don't like him. I don't quite understand why that is, but there's a lot of people that don't like Coach, and I actually like him. I mean, I know some of the stuff he does is a little frustrating, but I actually like him. And they said, well, he's only good because he landed Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. And I'm like, well, that's not – first of all, name me a coach that didn't win who won in spite of without having good players. Urban Meyer, he won a championship. Why? He went out and got Tim Tebow and a lot of top-ranked players, and that helped him be good. Every team wins because you went out and got great players. That's how you win. But this notion that they weren't good until Deshaun Watson showed up is just not accurate. And people forget, after that 2011 season where they went 10-4 and got embarrassed in the Orange Bowl, got beat by West Virginia 70-33. They got blown out 4 times that season. He went out and hot fought. That was year 1 of Chad Morris, and then the next year kept Chad Morris, fired Kevin Steele, and then hired Brent Venables, and they started to turn things around. That next year they went 11-2 and beat LSU in the Chick-fil-A Bowl. The next year in 2013 they went 11-2 again, beat Urban Meyer and Ohio State in the Orange Bowl, and then 2014 Deshaun Watson arrives, and that's when they started to kind of getting more recognition. They started to turn things around under Taj Boyd. But here's the thing about a lot of those seasons, and you say when they started to turn things around. So 2011, they lose 4 games. They go 10-4. Regular season, they beat Florida State that year, but lost to South Carolina, got smacked by South Carolina. 2012, they go 11-2. Their losses were to Florida State and South Carolina. 2013, they go 11-2, and their losses were to Florida State and South Carolina. 2014, they go 10-3. They lose to Florida State in overtime, and then they go down and they finally beat Steve Spurrier in South Carolina. And it was the first time in several years that they beat a Steve Spurrier coached South Carolina team. And that's kind of when you started to feel like they turned the corner. And then 2015, you saw Clemson go out that next season, and of course they went undefeated. They beat Florida State that season in a competitive football game. Ended up winning 23-13. Florida State, I believe, played their backup quarterback. They beat South Carolina that year 37-32, and of course beat Notre Dame also that season. And that was the last year of Steve Spurrier. And it wasn't until they kind of started beating Florida State and South Carolina that they turned the corner and started to win, doing things they hadn't done. And so when you look at Marcus Freeman, there's no like one team that he hasn't been able to beat in his 2 years that's on a regular schedule, but it's more of, hey, can you accomplish this? Can you do that? Can you build this? Can you build that? And so the concern for Marcus Freeman was, okay, you can play well in the big games. He's got 11 wins over top 25 teams in his 3 years, but then you'd have those weird games where you play you play your butt off against Ohio State and you beat North Carolina on the road and you play your butt off against USC and you lose to Marshall and you lose to Stanford. Like, where'd that come from? You look at last year and just not showing up against Duke and you barely won that game, and then not showing up against Louisville and just the ugly loss to Clemson. And then this year you have that ugly loss to North Carolina. It's like, okay, yeah, you've beat a lot of good teams, but when are you going to stop losing those games? Well, in the last 9 games, we're seeing them start to turn that corner. But this is the last opportunity to kind of say, hey, look, we're not that team anymore. And you go out there and kind of lay an egg against USC and you say, okay, yeah, you won 9, you're getting better, but you're not there yet because you're still losing to teams you shouldn't lose to. Or do you go out this weekend and say, hey, listen, this is what great teams do. We've got what's in front of us. All we're focused on is what's in front of us. And we can't get there until we beat USC. And so we got to focus all of our attention on USC. We have not arrived yet. We've not accomplished anything yet. We haven't won anything important yet. We've got to go out there as a football team and say, hey, we're going to do this. That's when we learn something about Marcus Freeman and this football team, is to kind of have that focus. And we saw a little bit of that this weekend against Army, where it's like, look, I kept telling you all week, this is a good Army team. They're good at this. They're good at that. And those things are all true. That is a good Army football team. Notre Dame made them look very, very mediocre. Do they got one more of those in them in the regular season? That's what we're going to learn about this weekend. And it's going to be a big statement game for Marcus Freeman for 2 reasons. One is obviously what I just mentioned in regard to, hey, have you truly turned a corner as a program or really taken that hard turn as a program? Or are you going to kind of have that backsliding type of game? That's number one. And number 2 is Notre Dame only has one real rival right now. And like, Navy's a rivalry from the standpoint of it's a rivalry of respect. It's a rivalry of tradition. It's not a football rivalry from the standpoint of, you worry about really ever losing to Navy. It's like somebody, you listen to Jeff Monken's press conference and somebody said, the Notre Dame rivalry, kind of laughed and he goes, I wouldn't really call this a rivalry. He goes, number one, we don't play every year. He goes, but to be a rivalry, you kind of got to win some. You know what I mean? And I thought that was a great comment. And that's why, the Navy rivalry is a lot different from the USC rivalry. The Stanford rivalry is kind of one of those manufactured rivalries that to me didn't exist until I was in college. It wasn't even a team you played every year. It didn't start that until I was in my freshman or sophomore year of college. So the rivalry that still exists at Notre Dame, it's a yearly rivalry that matters, is USC. That's the one that you decide to define yourself on. If you beat Stanford every year, nobody cares. You're supposed to do that. You beat Navy every year, you're supposed to do that. It's this notion that, oh man, you look at it and say, there's so many other rivalry games where it's like, if you're an Ohio State guy, you're supposed to beat Michigan every year, but it's not realistic, and then vice versa, but you expect it to do. And when you look at a game like Navy and Stanford, it's like you expect them to win every year, and you should win every year because there's a difference in competition. USC is the one that you expect to beat them every year because you hate them, they're your rival, but it's not going to happen because it's a really good football team. But it's the one measuring stick rivalry of Notre Dame. That's where I'm kind of going with this. Is Navy is not a measuring stick rivalry, because if you're not beating Navy, you are just not a good coach. Stanford is not a measuring stick rival. It was from about 2010 to 2017. They were a measuring stick rival. I even give them 18 because at the time that game was played in 18. They were a top 10 team. They ended up falling out of the top 25, but they were top 10 at the time. They haven't been a measuring stick rival since then. And especially now that David Shaw is gone, with all due respect to Troy Taylor, Notre Dame's last several games against Stanford have been, if we're being honest, have been kind of embarrassing. They're not really competitive games. The game that they lost 2 years ago was just an embarrassing loss. That was a bad football team. And outside of that, Notre Dame has absolutely dominated this rivalry in recent seasons. Notre Dame won in 2018 by 21. They won in 2019 by 21. They won in 2021 by 31. They won last year by 33, and they won this year by 42. It's just not that kind of rivalry anymore. And I don't know that it ever was as far as like a rivalry. They were a measuring stick because when they had the Brennan excuse me, the Kevin Hogan years, and then before that the Andrew Luck years, which were phenomenal. They were a top program, and you had to kind of go out there and says, "Hey, like this is what we're all about." But uh, USC is more of your true measuring stick rival, and how you perform against them is defines who you are as a coach. And when you look at the Marcus Freeman tenure, you're getting you're getting USC during a time when you played them one year where they were really good. And the next year they weren't. They were okay. You kind of broke them a little bit. This year they're a competitive team, but not a top team. You can't afford to have a 1-2 record to start your career against USC when you haven't gotten the best version of USC, because either Lincoln Riley is going to turn this program around, or they're going to fire Lincoln Riley and they're going to hire someone that can turn this program around. And this is your chance to kind of distance yourself, gain some superiority over them, and let them know, like, hey, listen, you guys are not on our level. And that's another thing that's in stake in this game, is truly taking over this rivalry. And they did that with Stanford, right? Lost that first game and then just whooped them the next 2 years. Lost us to USC in year one. So in year one of Marcus Freeman's tenure, he lost to their two Power 5 rivals, and Stanford and USC. You go out the next year and you dominate Stanford, you dominate USC. This year you dominate Stanford. You've got a chance to dominate USC, which won't be easy. And you have a chance to make a statement in the rivalry. And obviously part of that goes back beyond Marcus Freeman's tenure, because Notre Dame has won 5 of the last 6 against USC, 6 of the last 8. And if you go back to 2010, Notre Dame is 9-4 against USC. So you have a chance to really take over this rivalry if you can win this game at their place. It's going to be big for recruiting. Obviously, you're going to have Madden Faramo there. So this is a chance to make a statement. And there's one other piece to this game, big picture wise. And that is it's your final chance to make a statement to the College Football Playoff Committee. Look, USC is a team that the voters are going to look at a lot more favorably than Notre Dame fans are. It is a team that the computer models clearly look at very differently than Notre Dame fans do. And so this is an opportunity that some of you may not think it's the opportunity that it is when you look at because you just look at the record. And that's fine. You should look at the record. But what you have to understand is that's not all that the playoff committees look at. They're going to look at a lot of things. And I'll give you some examples of what I'm talking about. USC on the Football Power Index, which Notre Dame ranks number 3 behind Texas and Ohio State. The Football Power Index for ESPN ranks USC 18th in the country right now. Because, again, it takes a whole lot of things into consideration. They've lost to some quality teams. They've been in every game. They've had a chance to win every single game they've played. They are held in very high regard in that aspect. The Sagarin ratings have USC 27th. And then if you look at the Fermo Efficiency Index, which is one that I really like a lot, they have USC 16th going into this past weekend's game. Now, I don't know where they're going. They haven't updated them for this week yet. I don't know where they're going to be, but if they go down, they're not going to go down that much. They did beat a team that he has 65th in UCLA. So they're going to still be a top 20 team. There's no question about that. They're going to be a top 20 team in the computer model. So there's actually a lot at stake here from that standpoint, where this is going to be considered a quality win by voters. And because of all the different criteria that they use. They're not just sitting in the committee with schedules of teams like, oh, USC 6-5, and that's the end of the conversation. That's not the case. There's going to be a lot more to it. And so this is going to be a game that the voters are going to say is a bit of not a full like statement game like Ohio State versus Indiana or Georgia versus Tennessee. It's not that, but it is going to be a game that they're going to look at and say, hey, this is an opportunity for Notre Dame to show us who they are. Here's another aspect of it that I think that makes this very interesting. Notre Dame is still jockeying for playoff positioning. Now, that may change tonight when the new rankings come out. I don't know the answer to that just yet. We'll see how it plays out. But as of last week, Notre Dame was still behind Penn State in the college football playoff rankings. Now, there's a chance that when the new rankings come out Tuesday night, that Notre Dame will leap Penn State. And certainly there's a chance for that. Now, I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen. I think the committee could look at that and say, okay, Notre Dame's gaining, right? Because I do think Indiana falls behind Notre Dame. And say Notre Dame's gaining on Penn State, but let's just wait one more week and see how Notre Dame performs against USC. Or they could flip Notre Dame one spot ahead of Penn State. And if Notre Dame doesn't play that well in this game, even if they still win, they could always flip it back because you are going to have this final common opponent type of game with Penn State. And there's still a lot of people in the AP voters still have Penn State ahead of Notre Dame. The coaches poll still has Notre Dame behind Penn State. Good buddy of mine, love Mark Rogers, think he's wrong about Penn State. He has Penn State and Georgia ahead of Notre Dame in his top 25. There's a lot of people that still have Penn State ahead of Notre Dame. Heather Dinich at ESPN still has Penn State ahead of Notre Dame. And okay, that's fine. If you are unconvinced about Notre Dame being better, this game could be that final statement opportunity because you're going to look at Penn State and say, "Hey, listen," or USC and say, "Hey, look, I know their record is 6-5, but we've seen USC go toe to toe with some teams that, beat LSU, took Penn State to overtime. Like this is not your typical 6-5 team. This isn't Florida who's got 3 or 4 blowouts on their schedule. This isn't Oklahoma who's got multiple blowouts on their schedule. This is a 6-5 team that is a couple plays away from being a 9-2 football team right now. I think they were outplayed by Washington. Yes, they had a chance to win that game, but but Washington was the better team that day. I think that the Michigan game could have gone either way. I think that the Minnesota game could have gone either way. The Maryland game, they flat out should have won. And this USC football team is very close to being much better than their ranking shows. And so that's how people are going to view it. But you've got that game with Penn State. And when you look at kind of how that game played out, Penn State won that game 33-30 in overtime. And if you look at how the game played, Penn State was down big. They were down 20-6 at halftime. They come back, tie it to 20-20. USC takes a lead. Penn State's only lead, or they had a 3-0 lead early. USC scored the next 17. Penn State kicked the field goal to make it 17-6. USC went down, kicks field goal to make it 20-6. Penn State scores the first 2 touchdowns of the second half, tied at 20-20. USC goes back ahead 23-20. Penn State ties at 23 all. USC scores with 5:56 left to go up 30-23. Penn State ties it with 2:53 left on a touchdown pass from Drew Allard and Nicholas Singleton to make it 30-30. And then, of course, Penn State won in overtime. So you've got a game where you look at that. It was a back-and-forth game. USC was either leading or it was tied for most of the game. So Penn State trailed a good chunk of that game. But in a lot of ways, Penn State did outplay USC, and the committee's going to look at that. Penn State had 518 yards of offense and 28 first downs. USC had 409 yards of offense and 16 first downs. Penn State had 3 turnovers, and that was a big reason why that game was competitive. So the committee's going to look at all those things. And if Notre Dame goes out there and if Notre Dame is behind Penn State and they go out there and beat USC in regulation, but it's a close game where it's kind of back and forth and Notre Dame wins by a touchdown, but they kind of take a late lead or they win by 6 because they kick a couple late field goals, or maybe they're down and they score late. They're going to look at that and say, hey, look, they're the same team. They're the same team. Yeah, Notre Dame beat Purdue by 59. Penn State beat them by 39. They both blew them out. And then there's no reason to say, hey, we got to move Notre Dame up. There's no reason for that. What Notre Dame can do in this game is if they can beat USC in somewhat similar fashion to the other quality teams they've played, then I think that's the statement that could be made. And I don't mean the blowing them out the way that they blew out like Navy and Army I'm talking about beat them the way that you beat Georgia Tech. Even if you beat them the way that you beat Texas A&M, if that game would have played out like it should have, where Notre Dame doesn't miss a couple opportunities, where they were clearly the better team, outgained USC by over 100 or A&M by over 100 yards, where they're clearly the better team. But I don't know if it's plays out the way that the game actually played out, the way it should have played out. But the way it actually played out is it was a competitive game, and Notre Dame trailed for a chunk of that game. I don't know if that's going to be the thing that gets Notre Dame where it needs to be in regard to jumping Penn State if it plays out that way. But if it plays out the way, like, for example, your game against Georgia Tech did, where you're clearly the better team, 18-point win. They scored in the final seconds to make it 18 points. It was never really in doubt. You were clearly the better team, dominated statistically, dominated on the scoreboard, dominated with the eye test. Then I do believe that Notre Dame could go out there and make a final statement to say, if you don't pass Penn State this week, this type of game could allow you to dominate Penn State, or to pass Penn State in the final ranking or in the next ranking. And I think that matters. So you're talking about the difference between maybe being the 8 seed or the 7 seed, or potentially being high enough to get the 6 seed. And depending on how the Big Ten title game goes, you could jump up and get the 5. So I do think there's a lot at stake. I think 6 is most likely if they pass Penn State, but there's a chance if, like, Oregon really stomps Ohio State, or if Ohio State stomps Oregon, just like 20-plus point win, that could drop that team down at least a little bit, and have a chance to say, hey, listen, we're going to go up to 6 or 5. If you stay behind Penn State because you don't handle business the way you need to against USC this weekend, then you're most likely going to be in the 7th spot behind Penn State in the Big Ten runner-up. And there's a chance you could fall all the way down to 8 if Georgia upsets Texas, because what that would do is that would knock A&M down even more. And if Texas has a similar win over A&M that Notre Dame had, or an even more impressive win over Notre Dame than A&M had, if A&M loses to Georgia in a rematch and loses twice to Georgia, it's going to be very similar to what we talk about with Ohio State and Oregon. If Ohio State loses to Oregon for a second time, the thought is, well, they're going to stay ranked ahead of Notre Dame. Well, why wouldn't the same thing be true if Texas loses to Georgia for a second time, and Georgia's a top 10 team? I don't know that Texas is going to go all the way from 3 down below Notre Dame. It's not a given that that's going to happen. So if Georgia beats Texas and Notre Dame stays behind Penn State and the Big Ten runner-up, all of a sudden, you got the Big Ten runner-up at 5. You've got Texas and Penn State in those 6 and 7 spots, and all of a sudden, Notre Dame's the 8 seed. And I don't know that's why it does matter that Notre Dame can pass Penn State, because that puts them in striking distance for one of those higher seeds. And it's not completely out of the question for all that to happen. Especially the way this season is going, that's very possible. So I think that's why this game, on top of being a final momentum builder, you want to go in the postseason with a lot of momentum, not some clunker of a game that you kind of slept walk through, or you were sloppy, or you're just undisciplined, or whatever. You're really going to the postseason feeling really good about yourselves. Now you can get healthy the next 3 weeks, but then just keep kind of building on it. So I do believe that winning this game against USC in impressive fashion is important. It's important for Notre Dame because it does allow them an opportunity to pass. I actually am someone who believes that the committee will pass Notre Dame over Penn State. If they don't do it tonight, that they'll do it next week if Notre Dame beats USC convincingly, because now you'd have 2 common opponents, and Notre Dame would just end the season on a streak that just we haven't seen in a long time from anybody, much especially Notre Dame. So I do think this game matters a lot. So final statement opportunity for themselves, taking control of the USC rivalry, final statement for the committee, ending the number 5 ranked kind of curse. Marcus Freeman's 0-3 as a head coach when his team is ranked number 5 in the country. There's a lot of things at stake in this game. And I would say that I think Notre Dame's chances of making the playoff is increased with a second loss to USC compared to what it would have been a week or two ago. With a second loss, like prior to this past week, I'd have said Notre Dame loses the second game, they're done. They're out and should be out. But after Bama and Ole Miss took 3 losses, I'm not as certain that that's going to be the case, but you don't want to test that theory if you're Notre Dame. You win this game and you've locked up a home spot. No matter what. You win by a point, you've locked up a home game. Whether it's 8, 6, 7, 6, or 5, I don't know, but you're going to lock up a home spot. The more convincing this win is, the more likely it is that Notre Dame can leapfrog Penn State and be in position to be ahead of Texas if Texas loses to Georgia. So if you go out there and beat USC 34-13, something like that, then and Texas goes out and loses to Georgia for a second time, I do think that could be enough to drop Texas below Notre Dame, which would allow Notre Dame to stay in a 6 or 7 spot in the college football playoff. So there's a lot at stake, and that's why beating USC is important, period, because if you beat USC, you've locked up a playoff spot and you're going to be at home. But beating USC in a similar fashion to what you've beat your last several opponents provides you an opportunity to be ranked even higher, to be in a spot where you could be, in that 6 to 5 range. I think that's very, very important for Notre Dame because of who you're going to end up getting in the first round, and then just the path that it creates moving forward. I do think that's important for Notre Dame. So those are all aspects of this that I look at and say this is what's at stake for Notre Dame. This is why Notre Dame's got to be prepared to go out there and play at a very high level. And if they can't, then it's going to be an interesting weekend if they can't. If they do, then I think if Notre Dame, I said this on the board last night, if Notre Dame plays their C+ B- game, I think they win by a touchdown. If they play their B+ game, borderline B+ A- game, I think they win by 2 touchdowns. If they play their A game, they win by 3 or more touchdowns. That's just who this team is. That's where Notre Dame is. That's the reality of where USC is. But there's a chance if you play your C game, and that includes some turnovers, that you could lose this football game. USC is capable of beating Notre Dame. And the other thing, too, that I didn't mention is, with USC's 6-5 record, their only home loss was an overtime game to a team currently ranked ahead of Notre Dame in Penn State. All their other losses were away from home. They lost at Michigan by a touchdown. They lost at Minnesota by a touchdown. They lost at Maryland by a point. They lost at Washington by 5 points. USC has been a much tougher team at home. And if you really want to count all the games in California, they are 5-1 because they just won at UCLA last weekend. So this is a game, and staying west, they played obviously LSU in Las Vegas. They won that game as well. USC has been a really tough team when you play them on the West Coast. And they even had Penn State down 20-6 at halftime. So this is going to be a battle. It's one that Notre Dame's capable of winning and winning convincingly, but I think that we need to be able to look and kind of think about what this team is capable of being. So that's what's at stake for Notre Dame this weekend. And they're going to have a lot to prove this weekend, a lot to prove. And if they play the way that they're capable of, it's going to look a lot like what a lot of these other games have played. But I worry that it's just hard to play at this level week after week after week after week and not have letdown games. The positive you can maybe look at is to say some of the letdown games have happened. They just played far inferior opponents, and they were able to win convincingly. Like you could say Virginia was a bit of a letdown game with all the penalties and some of the uncharacteristic drops and some of those things. Maybe they worked their kinks out in those games, and that's why they played so well against Army, and maybe that'll be why they play so well against USC if they do. But they're going to have to go out there and be at their best. There's no question about it. So that's it for hold on a second. So here's a comment. So Irish English said, I can't help but think what you just said is contradicted your tone on the board a bit ago, Bryan. saying your general narrative, as I understand it, is that it's unwise to bet on Notre Dame minus 7.5 because they haven't beat USC on the road often. It's not what I said. I said that they haven't beat USC convincingly on the road, and USC has yet to lose a game by more than 7 points. It's the same thing I said about. I don't know why some of you aren't quite getting this. Was Notre Dame capable of blowing Army out last weekend? Of course. Was it proper to assume that it was going to happen? No. Same thing here. Is Notre Dame capable of beating USC? Yes. As I just said, if they play their A game, they'll blow USC out. No one doubts that. It's that nobody goes out there and plays that way every week. Nobody. Joe Burrow and LSU didn't do that. They almost lost to Texas. They beat Auburn by 3 points. That's it. It's if they play their C game, they're going to win by touchdown. Guys, they've played their C game recently. Virginia, Georgia Tech. They've played C games recently. And those teams were not as good as what USC is, in my opinion, or what USC is when they play well. And this is a team that's won 3 of their last 4 games. To act as if we should assume that Notre Dame is just going to go out there and blow USC out and talking down USC like they're no good, they suck, they're this, that's what I'm talking about. Notre Dame fans have this thing where they like to, when they're talking about their opponents, where they all suck, they should blow this team out. But then when other people who aren't Notre Dame fans talk about the schedule, why do you keep hating on Notre Dame? You keep talking about they haven't played anybody. Well, maybe they're just reading our message boards every week, and they listen to us talk about how every team Notre Dame plays sucks, and they're believing what we are saying, that every team that Notre Dame plays sucks. Because every week, oh, Louisville's not that good. They're not that good. Oh, okay. Stanford sucks. Oh, yeah, that's true. Georgia Tech's not that good. I'm not impressed by them. All right. Florida State sucks. Navy's not that good. We should kill Navy. All right. The Army sucks. We should kill Army. Okay. Oh, USC's no good. Should kill them. And then in the same breath, we'll say, I can't believe people keep disrespecting Notre Dame's schedule. Like, you disrespect Notre Dame's schedule. I've been every single week since the Texas A&M game, I got to sit here in the chat and on the message board and have everybody tell me how the team they're about to play sucks and they should win by 30, 40 points. And then y'all get mad when people say, well, you haven't played anybody, because you say they haven't played anybody. So my point is this. Notre Dame, if they play their A game, is capable of beating USC by 3 or more touchdowns. Who argues with that? Who argues that if these teams both play their best game, that Notre Dame won't win and win convincingly? Are they capable of doing that? Of course they're capable of doing that. But to say that I'm going to just assume it to the point that I'm going to lay money on the game, I don't know how anybody touches that. When you look at the fact that the last time Notre Dame beat USC in California by double digits was 2000. It was almost a quarter of a century ago. A quarter of a century ago. Before that, the last time they beat USC by double digits in the Coliseum was 1988. So since I'm 46 years old, I was 10 years old in 1988. So in the last 36 years, Notre Dame has beat USC in the Coliseum by double digits twice. They've played some bad teams out there, guys. They've played bad teams. 2012, USC was not good. Notre Dame beat it by 9 and needed to break up a pass in the end zone to keep them from making it a one-score game with a couple minutes left. In 2018, Notre Dame played USC, and they had a losing record. They got Notre Dame down 10-0 before Notre Dame woke up. And it wasn't until Ian Book hit Tony Jones on a swing pass with like 3 minutes left that Notre Dame put that game away. So if you think this is just a show up and win by 30 game, I don't know what to tell you. But to take that as me saying they're not capable of beating a team convincingly, what are we doing here? Notre Dame's capable of beating a lot of teams convincingly. It doesn't mean they're going to do it all the time. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't respect the opponent and say, hey, this is a good football team. You're going to have to earn this win. You're going to have to earn a win against Army, or against USC. So it's just kind of funny that Notre Dame fans complain all the time about how people disrespect the win, and people, I can't believe that the national media is not giving Notre Dame credit for beating Army. Why should they? All last week, I got people getting pissed at me in the chat, people getting pissed at me in comment section, people getting pissed at me on the board because I had the audacity to say that Army was actually a good football team. And then when they beat them, like, see, we told you Army sucked. You say that to me, and then when somebody else says, well, Army's not any good, you get pissed off. You can't have it both ways. That's not rational. So either USC sucks and they should win by 30, and Notre Dame shouldn't get any credit by beating them by 30 because they suck, or say, hey, look, this is a good football team. If you play your best, you got a chance to beat them convincingly because Notre Dame is an elite team right now. That's different than saying they're capable of doing it to say you expect them to do it. There's a difference. Joe Allen nailed it. Army didn't suck. Notre Dame is just that good. Exactly. And that's what was why I enjoyed the game. But then you have people who spent all week telling me that Army sucked, getting mad at the national media for saying Army sucked. So you can't have it both ways. So you want to know why I said what I said on the message board? It's that right there. This is a quality football team. They have a good roster. They're coached better than they were last year. They're not a really good team. They're 6-5, but they're a competitive 6-5. And if you play your C game, it's a touchdown game. If you play your C game, you might lose. That's a reality. If you play against USC, the way offensively, the way you did against Georgia Tech, the way you did against Virginia to a degree, the way you did it, against Northern Illinois, Miami of Ohio, this could be a challenging game. Very challenging game. So it's not like Notre Dame has to play in a way that we've never seen them play. It's if they play like they've played in other games. And the final piece is this, and here's why I get so frustrated by people who sit there and just tell me every week how every opponent sucks, every opponent sucks, every opponent sucks. It's like, I don't think that you can really appreciate how good this football team has played when you constantly convince yourself that every team they play sucks. Like, if you've convinced yourself that Army sucks and they don't belong on the field, shouldn't have been a top 25 team, their run defense isn't that good, then you don't have enough of appreciation for how well Notre Dame played. You think Notre Dame just went out and out-talented Army on Saturday, and to a degree they did. But the level of physicality and execution and all the different things that they showed were exceptional. And if you don't appreciate the quality of the opponent they played, then you're missing out. And that's what I'm trying to do. Is I'm not trying to pull a Lou Holtz and tell you that some team is something that they're not. I'm not trying to convince you that we said this about Virginia. Guys, Virginia's not that good. They're 5-5. They're 5-4. Their name should beat them convincingly, but they're tough. They're physical. They're this. That doesn't mean they're good. Saying Army's a good football team and has a really good run defense and a run game that's very concerning does not mean that Notre Dame can't beat them and Notre Dame's not good. It means that's a good football team. And in order for you to beat them and beat them soundly, you got to play really good football. And Notre Dame played really good football against them. And that's why, when you convince yourself that Georgia Tech sucks and we try to tell you, hey guys, this is a good football team, and they win 31-13, and we come into the chat after the game and everybody's pissed off because they didn't blow them out by more, that's not a Notre Dame problem. That's a you problem because you didn't show enough respect for how good this team is, how good this Georgia Tech team is, and how impressive that win was over Notre Dame. Then a couple weeks later, Georgia Tech goes out there and beats Miami. And, now they're 7-4 and they play Georgia this weekend. So that's why we do what we do. Is we want to have you guys have a healthy appreciation for the type of – we've seen this before. I tried to tell you all Marshall was a really good football team. You didn't want to believe me. I tried to tell you all Duke was a good football team. I tried to tell you Louisville last year was a good football team, and people didn't want to listen to me. And then they were shocked that Notre Dame, might not kill those teams. And so what I'm trying to do is not to spin something to tell you some team is something that they're not. It's to say you need to have an appreciation for who this team is. The Notre Dame football team has to have an appreciation for who this football team is. So if they do win and win by certain amounts, then you're going to have an opportunity to say, hey, look, appreciate what they did. If Notre Dame goes out there and beats USC by double digits and is clearly the better team, then you're gonna really appreciate how good this team is. I still have Notre Dame fans seriously that somebody I don't want to play Georgia, man. I don't. If you're afraid to play Georgia, then you just it's not even an irrational fear of Georgia. You don't know who this Notre Dame football team is. You don't. If you're I don't want to I want to avoid Ohio State, then you don't know who this Notre Dame football team is. Do you think Ohio State fans are sitting there saying, "Boy, I hope we don't get Notre Dame in our bracket"? No, they're not, because they actually think their football team is really good. And my thing is, if you understood the quality that of the team that Louisville is, that Georgia Tech is, that Army was, that Navy was before Notre Dame broke them, then you'd have a much better appreciation for how good this Notre Dame team is playing. That's why I get frustrated sometimes by that and say the things that I say. So that's my response to that. I appreciate you bringing it up, but that's why that frustrates me. That's why I get frustrated when people just constantly talk down the teams that Notre Dame are playing, because, man, I'm telling you, these are some good football teams that they're beating. They really are. And yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. So that's part one of today's show. Next, I'm going to get to kind of diving into USC and who USC is and preview this game a little bit. But before I do, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you've not done so, shoot me go sign up for the message board at boards.breakdown.com. I know Zach Martin, you had some comments about Dabo. I'm not able to respond to those during the show. If you could do me a favor, bring those up on the channel or on the chat, the message board, because I'd love to engage with you on that. I don't think that was a fair representation of Dabo's issues with what are going on right now in college football. So we could have that, but that's where we can take some of those more in-depth conversations. And Zach, you always defend things that you believe well. I think it'd be a good conversation. So go ahead and throw that on the message board. You got to be a premium member. And you can do that at boards.irishbreakdown.com.